Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Thursday, September 15th, 2022. Time for another show. And our second consecutive show prominently featuring Martha's Vineyard. Not by design, but by coincidence. As I mentioned in, well, what was supposed to be this morning's post on Daily Kos about the show going live as usual and where you can find it. But Daily Kos also down again this morning, and was it yesterday or the day before that they had a similar problem? Well, I imagine this is driving the programmers crazy. But anyway, as I had mentioned, or had planned to mention in that post, this is the second consecutive day that we've been mentioning Martha's Vineyard, shattering the previous record of one day in a row in which we had mentioned Martha's Vineyard on the show. So a 100% increase in the run here for Martha's Vineyard. So, who knows what could be happening next? Of course, this morning, it's in the news because it was in the news last night. It was in the news last night because Ron DeSantis is out there claiming credit for this kidnapping, this terrorist act, this human trafficking of flying migrant families to Martha's Vineyard to dump them there so that they wouldn't be a problem for Florida. You know, the popularist Florida, or I guess I should say Republican tactic, both in Florida, I guess, and in Texas, where I think it may have originated. And in fact, where this flight originated, as a matter of fact, just to add a weird and just an unusual twist to the story. But the basic facts of it emerged to us this way, that yesterday we received word from folks on Martha's Vineyard, not vacationers who happen to be talking about the show, but authorities there, saying that a second plane load of migrants had been flown there, and had originally, I guess, the story was that they originated in Florida, but they didn't. They later found out. But this is the program wherein Republican governors think they're doing something cool and funny by distributing, you know, I understand the point they're trying to make, distributing the problems of migration that plague their states. Not plague, that's the wrong word for it, but that's what they say, of course. They say it's an invasion, which is incredible and stupid. And remember, by the way, back in the days when someone would say, a progressive person would say, a war on something ought to be, we ought to have a war on, usually war on poverty, war on something terrible, as opposed to the war on terrorism, the war on this, that, or the other thing. And Republicans used to say, war, how dare you invoke something that maybe something has something to do with our troops because you said war even though it was metaphorical, therefore it's stolen valor and you're in trouble. I mean, they really actually tried to make that stretch at one point. Anyway, so why that doesn't apply to calling immigration an invasion, I don't know. At any rate, the point is that Republicans are shipping migrants. They think it's very funny. They also think it's very making a good political point, saying, well, and it could, but you are distributing the burden, certainly, of resettling migrants by sending, but they thought it would be funny to send them to places that have either declared themselves, in their minds, whether they've actually done this or not, but Republicans believe that they have declared themselves to be sanctuary cities or sanctuary jurisdictions, in some case, larger than a city. And so therefore, you say you're welcoming to migrants, well, then you take them. And they think that's really hilarious to drop people off either off of buses in Washington, D.C. or New York or Chicago or something like that. Now they've upped the game. And they are dropping people on Martha's Vineyard, which is, of course, everybody knows, the playground for the rich and famous, except, of course, the playground is closed. It's past Labor Day. The rich and famous have left. Many people are pointing out year-round islanders who are, for the most part, hardy middle-class working folks who serve the tourism industry during the summer, perhaps, or function around it and live with the inconvenience of it, maybe. they're the ones left holding the bag and dealing with these plane loads of migrants being dumped with no knowledge of where they are or where they were supposed to be going. Others before me have pointed out that, quite correctly, this, ordinarily, if you or I did it, would land you in some trouble, because allegedly what they're doing is luring these migrants onto the plane with promises that they are going not on a plane, but rather on a bus, and are going to be delivered post-haste to New York or to Chicago, where they would get expedited work papers and be processed as legal immigrants. And, of course, who knows what they may or may not have understood from that. But lying to them in order to herd them onto the plane and dump them somewhere where they have no idea where they are, limited capacity to deal with them because, let's face it, Martha's Vineyard doesn't get plane loads of migrants every day. Whereas Texas, New York, for that matter, Chicago frequently does, and they would know what to do with people who show up that way. But look, they thought they could score some political points, so they did it. As I mentioned, as the story has emerged, the migrants themselves, why not talk about them just a little bit, are said to be refugees from Venezuela. Do I have that right? All right. Well, at any rate, they might very well be claiming to be escaping the totalitarian leftist regime there. As a matter of fact, at some point earlier, Ron DeSantis, in his battle against socialisms, signed a big proclamation welcoming Venezuelan migrants as the victims of communism, and welcoming them to the United States, but now he is shipping them away. The thing is, he had to import them in order to do this. They're not arriving in Florida, they're arriving in Texas. So for whatever reason, they use this shadowy network of charter aircraft at executive airports, out of the way from airports that you and I might use, taking, commercial flights somewhere, and flew them from Texas to Florida to South Carolina, for some reason, and then on to Martha's Vineyard, and then dump them there. So all I can tell you is a Florida man is out there rounding up vulnerable children in some cases who don't even speak the language, desperate for any kind of help that they can get. He is moving them through a weird, shadowy network of backwater, exclusive, executive, private jet airports, through a network of, again, private charter jets, and flying them to a vacation paradise island for his own sick pleasure. And I was told Jeffrey Epstein was dead, but apparently he lives on in the form of the governor of Florida. Now, this could and should subject you to a criminal case of kidnapping and human trafficking, but at the time, the perpetrator was wearing a suit and claiming to be the government. And so, there's very little you can do about that. See the Espionage Act for another reference. So, anyway, we'll catch up with that fun story and others. Greg Dworkin is here, unless he's been kidnapped and flown to Martha's Vineyard. In the meantime, I don't know. Well, we'll just check. Are you there, Greg?
I am.
Okay.
But, if Ron DeSantis claims that I was, that probably means I wasn't, because he basically lies about everything.
Yeah.
This is the guy who set up voter fraud by luring people to vote and then arresting them for doing same.
Yes.
So, this is not surprising. This
he
little
loves entrapment. That's his thing.
Quick summary, is from David Wade, who's a WBZ news anchor, 29-time Emmy winner, he says. But
Really?
More important, he's from Boston.
Oh, okay.
We can confirm 50 migrants were flown to Martha's Vineyard and are being helped at a church. The men, women, and kids said they didn't know where they were. And Governor DeSantis told Fox he sent them as part of his relocation program for illegal immigrants, quote unquote. When they landed, they just started walking until they found town offices. DeSantis had promised to send migrants to progressive states. That's why they went to the Carolinas, right?
Yes.
So he told Fox News states like Massachusetts, New York, and California will better facilitate the care of these individuals. Some conflicting information. We're told the migrants are telling translators in the vineyard they are from Venezuela and flew in from Texas, but DeSantis claimed it was his program. We got a statement from Governor Baker's office. The Baker administration's in touch with local officials regarding the arrival of migrants. not illegal immigrants, migrants.
Yes.
It says they will support the effort to provide shelter services.
Mm-hmm.
Emergency officials on the vineyard are now asking for volunteers to help with the unexpected urgent humanitarian situation, and that's where things stand. So I got a bunch of other lightning round stuff to do.
Okay.
But, speaking of Boston, Aaron Judge didn't hit any home runs last night in the Yankee win, but I think we should probably highlight Matty Walsh.
Okay, why not?
Because he's smart, and he did a tremendous job, along with his boss yesterday, in resolving the rail lockout, which is not a strike. It's a lockout by the railroad owners, the barons.
Okay. Hey.
But things are much better than they could have been. People probably won't notice that things are resolved, but they would have noticed it if that lockout went on, because it would have been a disaster for the economy and for inflation.
Yes, but now the trains run on time.
Dark Brandon intervened and got things settled, as Oliver Willis pointed out by showing multiple pictures of Biden around trains, whether it's taking Amtrak or giving a speech in front of one. And Oliver essentially said, look, the idea that this guy who cares about trains is going to let this happen is ridiculous. To which I pointed out, this also means, of course, there will be no ice cream strike.
Oh.
Not going to happen. Secretary of Ice Cream will intervene if they have to. Because it's smart.
It's just something he
smart politics.
Okay. My boy's wicked smart.
Wicked smart. So these rail workers will get better pay, improved working conditions, and peace of mind around their health care costs, all hard-earned, Biden said. The tentative resolution, says Bloomberg, was announced a day before a Friday deadline that could have seen rail workers walk off the job or be locked out by the companies, freezing critical infrastructure that transports around 40% of all long-haul cargo in the U.S. and threatening a fresh wave of supply chain chaos. Again, to remind people probably have forgotten or didn't know, but there are, just as at sea, if you track ships, there's a constant line of things bringing stuff.
All right.
There's a constant line of trains bringing coal and other goods around the country that are running 24/7. And because they run by 24/7 and because they're more automated, you have less workers getting the same pay with absolutely no breaks.
Yuck.
The train has
bad
breaks,
when you
some
have
of
no
them,
breaks.
but
Oh
they don't have bathroom breaks, and they don't have sick days.
Yuck.
So
that's
a big deal. AP has the same story. Biden tentative railway labor deal reached, averting strike and averting lockout, I would point out.
Okay.
The threat of a shutdown had put Biden in a delicate spot politically. The Democratic president believes unions built the middle class, but he also knew a rail worker strike could damage the economy ahead of the midterms when majorities in both chambers of Congress, key governorships, and scores of important state officials will be up for grabs, leaving him in an awkward position, which, by the way, he showed up at and fixed.
Yeah, and he fixed the supply chain, too, it sounds like.
Right. So a lot of stuff
go.
here in the statement. The tentative agreement between railroads and unions will include a 24% wage increase over 5 years, starting in 2020,
all right,
including a 14.1% increase effective immediately.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Which would be good for them because, it's good to pay people for the work they do. They're essential workers.
That's
and then Jeff Stein from the Washington Post said, people familiar tell me that the deal does give railway workers ability to take days off for medical care without being subject to punishment, a key demand of the unions. President Biden was personally animated by need to get this done, I'm told. Somebody must have told him that they transport ice cream by rail, and so that did it.
Well, he's a big rail fan, used to go back and forth to Delaware on Amtrak all the time. Now he flies on Air Force One, for which he's being admonished. Also,
which again, what he's doing. Here's a Terry Moran comment, which I think is going to throw in because we'll talk about this a little later too. But Terry Moran says, it may be worth saying something out loud here. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is obviously the greatest international security crisis since 9/11, and at this point, it's got to be said, Joe Biden and his team have handled it masterfully.
I guess so. I mean,
from forging
Russia's
mostly
losing.
behind the scenes a united NATO diplomatic front against Moscow, one that's not cracked, to the wrecking of the Russian economy, a process still in its early stages, which includes supporting European efforts to find alternative sources of energy, to the clear red line drawn at the Ukrainian border that has kept the U.S. and NATO out of any fighting and given Putin no excuse to widen the war, to the steady flow of U.S. intelligence to Ukrainian forces supporting their stunning achievements in the field, to the gigantic amount of arms aid the U.S. government has supplied, with more to be announced, which is now proving decisive in the rout of Russian forces in Kharkiv and changed the dynamic across the country. Joe Biden has, at this point, aced this test of his leadership.
Yes.
And he got a supplemental extra 10 points for averting a railway crisis.
Yeah. You know, by the way, I think these middle-of-the-roader objective journalists ought to give him an extra 10 points for pulling all of that off without stopping and taking the very available opportunity of saying, you know, we're only in this mess because of Donald Trump, who not only was a big Putin supporter and Russia lover, but a notorious Ukraine hater. And remember,
not only that,
he did, of course,
we're
extort
going
them.
to take both warring factions here, and we're going to dump them at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
Because Ron DeSantis figures this is the way to handle problems. We'll just take all the problems and we'll just fly him down to Mar-a-Lago and dump him there.
Why is that? Brings up
He
a good
claims
point.
to be president. Let him fix it.
Why isn't Ron DeSantis flying Russian troops to Martha's Vineyard to take them out of combat in Ukraine?
You know, it just gives you an idea of how stupid, you know, the Republican position is.
Yes.
And how wicked smart the
smart.
Biden administration's being. Terry Moran goes on to say, they've praised Russia, blamed NATO, and predicted doom and defeat for Ukraine from the start. It wasn't easy here at home. There have been plenty of nationalist naysayers all along the way. Donald Trump,
Right.
Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, J.D. Vance, and a horde of online armchair strategists and right-wing media types. Polls suggest Biden hasn't earned much goodwill from the American public for his statesmanship on Ukraine. He's in a deep hole with voters on so many issues. Geostrategy is unlikely to help him, but the long-term follow-on effects from American leadership are likely to be profound. China will think twice about seizing Taiwan. NATO's expanded. Old strategic bonds with the U.S. He goes on and on and on.
All right.
You know, and there's like 5 or 6 more tweets, and just at the end says we may no longer be the indispensable nation. That Biden's shown again, American power and American values can be a difference. It's a big effing deal.
All right. That's pretty good.
So, you know, he's right.
Good. It's about time one of these Morans got things right.
Yeah, well, I'll show you what does show up in the polls. This is from AP today. It's only one poll. I don't understand why media latches on, gloms onto something and says this poll is important, as opposed to other polls not being important, even though they may say the same thing.
Sponsorship.
Or say the opposite. But this one
paid.
is the AP. Everybody
prominent.
loves the AP if you're a reporter.
Right.
Biden approval rises sharply ahead of midterms. AP NORC poll today. Biden's average went up from 36 to 45, a 9-point improvement. His outlook appears better after notching a string of legislative successes that left more Americans ready to judge the president on his preferred terms. The president's approval rating remains underwater, with 53% of adults disapproving of him. But you know what? In these partisan, polarized times, 45 to 50 is actually a pretty good range.
The countries, they keep telling us, evenly divided. Well, 53%, that's about even.
Now, here's a Fox News poll. We'll do a little bit of polling here because there's so much that came out.
0%.
Now that it's after Labor Day.
Yeah.
Labor Day with a Labor Day resolution. Thank you, Joe Biden. Have an ice cream. A lot of the quality pollsters are coming out.
Okay.
This is Fox News. Fox News, whatever you think of them, employs quality pollsters, bipartisan pollsters. Fox News poll, inflation, abortion, motivating voter turnout. So the headline piece is their congressional vote preference, which has improved 6 or 7 points in favor of the Democrats. It's now 44-41 Democratic on the congressional vote preference. And for comparison's sake, in August of 2022, it was tied at 41. In September of 2018, it was 46-40. Note that Republicans never get above 40. 41, that's where they always are. And the variable is how pissed are you at the Democrats for not delivering, because you don't expect anything from Republicans.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think this also, by the way, accompanies a big headline in Politico that Chuck Schumer was overheard talking to other Democratic senators that he thinks that the House is lost, which is not what he said.
Oh, okay.
He was talking to people like Mark Kelly from Arizona, and was speaking loud enough to be overheard because that's what New Yorkers do. And he was probably interrupting people, and he was, doing the things that New Yorkers do.
He's doing what? All right.
So he says, look, I mean, we got a 60% chance of keeping the Senate, but a 40% chance of keeping the House.
That's 100%. Terrific.
But in political context,
yes,
a 40% chance of keeping the House is not only terrific, it's actually a toss-up.
Yes.
If anybody remembers 2016 and Hillary Clinton's chances, a 60% chance of keeping the Senate is a toss-up.
Yeah.
So in that context, 40%, 60%, that's pretty much matches what 538 says is the chances or the odds. And the fact of the matter is, a 40 or 60% chance, either one or anything in the middle, is, between the 40-yard lines, is a toss-up. I have no idea who's going to win.
Yeah, everybody's punting.
That's what he said.
Okay.
Right? And that's what Fox News poll said. So they go ahead and run the numbers and say, according to their model, a 3% lead, a 3-point lead for Democrats in their model gives the House like a 1+1 seat for Republicans.
Okay.
That's pretty much a tie.
Pretty slim. +1 seat. That'll work great.
Right?
Yeah.
So Georgia governor's race. Oh, the other thing that, and from the Fox poll, that was important, as Bill Kristol points out, whatever one thinks of the policy, the GOP conviction that canceling student loan debt was a loser always seemed questionable. Sure enough, by 54 to 43, voters approve. Majorities of those both with a college degree, 52%, and those without, 56%, support the policy.
Okay.
So it's popular.
Yeah. Good.
Reporters, remember, we went through this with Iraq and George W. Bush. Reporters have fixed in their mind their narrative.
Yeah.
Democrats are going to lose, and Biden's unpopular. Except the polls say he's not that unpopular, and the polls say the Democrats may not lose.
But we're objective.
Exactly.
Right. So that's, okay.
Quinnipiac poll.
What can I tell you?
Georgia governor's race, too close to call. Quinnipiac University finds. Georgia Senate race, Warnock leads Walker 52 to 46.
Okay, that's too close for that guy.
Monmouth, Fetterman has issue edge over Oz.
All right.
Fetterman is a positive personal rating of 47, favorable to 42 unfavorable. Just under half the electorate will either definitely or probably vote for him. And Oz has a net negative personal rating of 36 to 52. Dope. About 4 in 10 will either definitely or probably vote for him.
Okay, that's not enough.
Right? So he loses.
Yeah, well, you should just concede now.
The very respected MU Law poll, run by my friend Charles Franklin, notes tightening in the race in Wisconsin. Tightening of the races is utterly predictable, says Polls and Votes. That's Charles Franklin. And negative opinions of all candidates may increase by election day. But in the meantime, the new Marquette Law School poll of Wisconsin finds Johnson and Evers holding slim leads. When we talk about slim leads, we're talking about a point.
That's slim.
Right? Johnson leads Barnes 49-48. The last poll had Barnes up by 7, so that's where the tightening is. Been a lot of money dumped in on Johnson's side, hitting Barnes on crime. Remember, Wisconsin is ground zero for conservative voters thinking all cities in Wisconsin were destroyed by Black Lives Matter.
Their own city is. My house was burned down.
Right. Okay. In the governor's race, 47% of likely voters support Democratic Governor Tony Evers, while 44% favor Republican Tim Michels. The independent candidate is chosen by 5%, 3% who don't know. So basically too close to call. We do have a secret weapon in Wisconsin. That's Ben Wickler and a very competent Wisconsin Democratic Party. So we'll see how that goes. So, again, I think it's just important to highlight the fact that, polling's now going to start coming out. We know that state level polls aren't always accurate. They drive narrative rather than predict. But the narrative is these are close races and everything matters. So the fact that Biden has this string of wins followed by Terry Moran acknowledging that in Ukraine, that's a win. And by the way, with the railways, that's a win. And by the way, with this AP poll, that's a win. You can expect that's going to drive storylines for a bit.
Hope so. I like the one that Terry Moran did, so maybe we'll get some more of that. It's a trend now.
Yeah. Daily Beast also notes, again, for some lightning round stuff. By the way, 68-year-old Vladimir Nikolaevich Sungorkin, editor-in-chief of the Russian state newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda.
Okay.
According to the newspaper, otherwise known as KP.
The Window Times.
Sungorkin died suddenly after showing signs of suffocation during the trip on Wednesday that he took. He was fine. He was moving. He was trying to find a place to have a picnic, and he suddenly suffocated.
Showing signs of suffocation. So, I thought it was like an illness.
This is reported by the Daily Beast, and I'm surprised their headline. The headline is another Putin ally dead after suffocating on business trip, but they might as well
I didn't even know you could
have had the headline, Luca Brasi sleeps with fishes.
Holy cow.
Luca Brasi.
I thought maybe the name of his newspaper was like, the new window, the Defenestration Times or something. But no.
It might as well be.
Really? I mean,
and you don't know what's going on here. Is Putin knocking off people who are disloyal, or are other people knocking off Putin loyalists trying to send a message like they did with Luca Brasi?
I don't know. The message is in Russian. How am I supposed to know?
Well, a fish wrapped in newspaper doesn't need a language.
Yeah,
I guess
every
so. Language.
I know, but the newspaper is Pravda. That's the problem. I can't read it.
Yeah.
So
I can't believe the newspaper, but I can smell the fish.
I guess. Oh, it's unbelievable what's happening there. I don't know. Okay, well, I apologize for laughing at the man's murder. Jeez. It's just absurd what's happening.
Know it was murder. He just spontaneously suffocated.
That's what happens with
cases of spontaneous suffocation are very common in that country.
It's a problem. The World Health Organization ought to be looking into it. We'll ask them next.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. What the hell are we doing again? Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I was just thinking about this.
Live from Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, right. By the way, though Daily Kos may have been down this morning, I haven't checked on the status.
It's back up.
It's back up, but Skynet never went down. That's good news. I got in my email sitting here, they're listening to the show. Through the auspices of PayPal, I guess they're partnering with PayPal now at Skynet, get $15 off at Vineyard Vines. I can order islandware in case I get, kidnapped and deported to Martha's Vineyard at some point. That does remind me of a weird angle that on the whole Martha's Vineyard thing is I was wondering, you could probably get away with a television ad in the gubernatorial contest there in Florida. I was thinking if a Democrat had done what Ron DeSantis just did, there would be attack ads about spending taxpayer money to charter private jets to fly pampering migrants with free trips to Martha's Vineyard.
I want to know whether or not Alan Dershowitz volunteered to pro bono represent them.
Well, who? DeSantis? Probably.
No, the immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, they would be the ones with a case, but...
The migrants.
Now they'll have to...
The ones who were kidnapped and dropped there.
Yeah.
Because he so much cares about the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, either that or
maybe, or maybe the actual story that we'll find out tomorrow is that Dershowitz volunteered to represent him, and they said no.
That could be.
You're Alan Dershowitz. You have to be rejected on everything, and then he'll write an article about it.
I was going to think, though, on the other hand, he does have experience with defending Florida men who traffic in vulnerable young people, flying them to private vacation islands. He
There's
does
always
have that
a
experience.
Angle. So I was going to start with something else, but all this other stuff happened. And speaking of stuff, I was
$15 off though.
Faintly amused to give you an idea of dad jokes and the things that amuse me. Yeah. This is Talking Points memo, the morning memo.
That is amusing.
And their tagline, like we should really steal for the show. It's a lot of things happened. Here are some of the things. I mean, it's just perfect. It's exactly what we do on the show.
All right. I can go with that. Here's some of the other ones. That's our tagline.
Here's some of the other things that happened. So I got this really intriguing text claiming something which wasn't quite true. I'll give you the actual true version from Bloomberg. U.S. House panel received Secret Service text messages from January 6th. The committee had been seeking text or after-action reports. It's unclear if messages include those believed to have been erased. Somebody had tweeted to me that they got all the texts. Well, they didn't get all the texts, or at least if they did get all the texts, they didn't announce that. The unclear part.
Yes. All right. Yeah. I mean, I doubt it, but okay.
But
they got
definitely text messages between Secret Service personnel on the day of the U.S. Capitol assault are included in a substantial tranche of additional material recently obtained by the House committee investigating the insurrection.
Vive la tranche.
It's a combination of a number of text messages, radio traffic, that kind of thing. Thousands of exhibits, said Benny Thompson, who chairs the committee.
Great text.
Representative Zoe Lofgren, another Democrat on the panel, described some of the records as relevant and worthwhile.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad they're relevant. That's good.
We have a number of staffers going through it all right now. It's a work in progress. Secret Service didn't immediately respond.
They're secret.
What's his name? Tony Orlando.
Orlando
didn't immediately respond because he quit and so he doesn't have to.
Right. Not my job.
For now. So that goes into the mix of trying to figure out what the January 6th committee is going to do between now and the end of the month when they have their hearing publicly. But you got to think that whatever they have is going to be interesting.
Yes, well, relevant.
Worth watching.
At any rate, as Zoe Lofgren tells us. Right.
Anyway, getting back to TPM and their summary, they've got Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. Eric Adland, a Republican running for Colorado's 7th congressional district, privately told conservatives 2020 election was undermined by fraud, but he's being, quote, deliberate, end quote, with his public rhetoric because it's not an issue that wins us this race.
Oh, okay. So he's an election denier, and he's denying that he's an election denier. Exactly.
Okay. I deny that you even brought that up as a possible description.
Really, he's just a habitual denier.
Yeah. So 538's tally of 200 candidates who fully denied the 2020 election is likely an undercount because it's probably a lot more guys like him.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Now, Mark Meadows complied with DOJ's January 6th subpoena. Same materials Meadows had turned over to the House January 6th committee before he stopped cooperating, which included thousands of texts and emails.
Wait a minute.
So if Meadows is now cooperating with the DOJ and it takes time to go through thousands of pieces of material, it again tells you that on the other hand, Mark Garland's being aggressive, but on the other hand, it takes a while to get this stuff done.
I suppose it'll take a while to convince people that you can really put the screws to them, and then so he stopped complying with the committee.
Well, the committee has no teeth. DOJ does.
That's the issue. So then the DOJ said, well, now we'll make the same demand, and so with that he's complying.
And he said,
that makes some
yes,
sense.
Sir.
Sure. I mean, they're the ones that can put you in jail.
In what format would you like it?
Yeah, I guess so. GIF. No, what? GIF. Oh, I see. All right. Well. Good.
Well, good. Charlie Kirk accuses Lindsey Graham of deliberately tanking GOP Senate majority with abortion ban. There's a Dems in disarray story. So Lindsey Graham's new 15-week national abortion ban is backfiring among conservatives to the point where some are apparently starting to suspect he flopped on purpose.
All right.
So there you go.
Lindsey Jenkins.
And yeah, speaking of Leroy Jenkins, New Hampshire GOP offers a little gift to Democrats in Senate race. Retired Army General Don Baldock. We talked about this yesterday, but I sent you the picture of him dressed as Captain America for his
What is that shield?
Acceptance speech. He had a red, white, and blue shirt on with stars on his shoulders.
Yes.
And then he was holding up a shield with arrows saying, "We've taken the slings and arrows of our opponent and we blocked them."
Slings
so
too,
it's kind of like a cross between Captain America and Wonder Woman. You didn't even realize one's DC and one's Marvel.
Oh, well, that won't matter, will it? Okay. Do people notice those things?
They do.
Yeah, I guess so. So yeah, that was a very that brought to mind. That was a very gather your armies moment.
Yeah,
remember that guy? Okay. Well, it's an evolution. This whole thing started with these lunatics wearing tricorn hats and saying "Hear ye, and we the people." And
right.
Stuff like
And
that.
next on my long list of things to talk about is a reminder that today's a deadline of sorts.
Oh, okay. This is 15th.
Today is the day where DOJ told Aileen Cannon in Florida, you have to make a decision about giving us the 100 documents that are marked classified, and if you don't, we're going to the 11th Circuit.
Oh.
So you need to let us know by Thursday, September 15th, the Ides of September.
Okay. Yeah, not really, but yes, I didn't even really. It's interesting. Parties usually don't give judges, maybe they do, deadlines, but this is a new one. You usually hear about the judges giving the parties deadlines, but okay, if they have to file an appeal, they need to know whether they need to do that work.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know what's going on, but there's a chance we'll hear something.
Yeah. All right.
Somebody else put it that Cannon and the DOJ are playing chicken on the deadline today, but I'm not completely again, reminder to people, I read the news, but I'm not a lawyer. I don't know exactly what the deadline is and who's liable to do what.
Yeah.
And usually deadlines mean midnight, and usually the DOJ files like 10 minutes before it's due.
They have
and
that.
So I don't, they have that right. So I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
I'm
we'll
just
see.
saying today's an interesting day. Keep an eye on it.
Okay, they may get an answer, they may not. The deadline might be because filing deadline is tomorrow, so they need to know. So they may delay things. We'll see. But
she may also say something about which Trump suggestion she accepts for the special master.
Right.
Oh yes, the DOJ also suggested some things, but nobody really thinks they'll pick that. They think they'll pick Judge Deary, who is the non-hack that Trump suggested that all sides respect.
Yes.
And that would make total sense for her to do that.
Yeah.
That's the smart
good face-saving thing for everybody to do. And Republicans or the Fox TV talkers are already bashing Deary, though.
Really?
Yes. He apparently...
It's Trump's choice.
Yeah, right. Well, what does he know? He's an idiot. So apparently Deary signed the FISA warrants on Carter Page.
Yes, he did.
So, and they're like,
which,
that just
by
goes
the way,
to show you.
John Durham wrapped up his tenure without doing anything about it.
That's right. So, like a good, he's a nice,
because
pleasant
there's nothing
fellow.
to the Carter Page story that is
as it turns
needs
out.
any further elaboration of what we already know.
So,
he deserved it, in other words.
Right, pretty much. And Durham's gone nowhere, but he could have stayed home and done this and lost all of his cases.
He had
from
no
his home in
comment when asked
Connecticut.
about the fact that the grand jury that's supposedly working with him expires. I guess that's the deadline.
Yeah, maybe that too is the Thursday the 15th. Who knows?
The government, according to CNN, the government and the public are irreparably injured when a criminal investigation of matters involving risks to national security is enjoined, the department argued, when giving its notice of an appeal to Cannon.
Oh, okay.
And it also served notice that the DOJ will seek the intervention of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals if Cannon does not grant its request to suspend parts of her ruling by September 15th. That would be today. That's what I was referring to.
Right, that's the deadline. All right, well, we'll see whether they follow through, whether she acts. I know she was concerned about blocking the damage assessment by the intelligence community, and it's the DOJ's position that they just can't really do it without the FBI's involvement because they do counter-espionage. That's their gig.
Right. Switching topics a bit here for another interesting one. Tim Russ notes on Twitter, the Russian army is losing so badly, Putin is at risk of losing the support of the Republican Party.
Okay.
Which is bad.
They love the Russian army.
All right. So here's an updated thread from Mick Ryan, who tweets as War in the Future, strategist, leader, and author, retired Australian Army Major General.
Oh.
From down under. An updated thread on the wartime leadership demonstrated by Zelensky with a focus on visiting troops in the field, particularly in the wake of the successful Kharkiv offensive. He went, of course, to Izium. His visits have many purposes. It allows him to get a feel for the morale and capability of his military in the field. You can read reports, but there's no substitute for walking the ground with leaders and soldiers. Another reason for visits is to engage with junior soldiers, to inspire them, recognize their sacrifice, and reiterate the purpose. Purpose is the most important thing a leader can provide. As Eisenhower writes in Crusade in Europe, belief in an underlying cause is fully as important to success in war as any local esprit or discipline induced or produced by command.
Really? That's French for
enthusiasm.
I think.
Exactly. Another reason for these visits is to show he's got trust in his nation's army. His visits are also an important way he differentiates himself from Putin. It's very unlikely Putin would ever visit the poorly fed, terribly led, retreating Russian troops.
Right. It might fall out the window.
Because they'd kill him. Finally, these visits draw attention. Putin accidentally suffocated while reviewing the troops.
I don't know what happened.
Apparently, a lot of lead got caught in his throat for some reason.
Really? Wow.
Finally, these visits draw attention from audiences beyond Ukraine and demonstrating he's not a bunker leader. Zelensky shows Western citizens he's the leader of a nation worth supporting. In a study of wartime leaders, Elliot Cohn noted that in war, to see things as they are and not as one would like them to be, to persevere despite disappointments, to know of numerous opportunities lost and perils ahead, to lead knowing that one's subordinates, colleagues are in some cases inadequate, in others hostile, is a courage of a rare kind.
All right.
And that would be Zelensky. That's his opinion.
Yes. Oh, and
this one from Insider used to be called Business Insider. Their URL still says Business Insider, but they've renamed themselves. The army Putin spent 2 decades building has been largely destroyed in Ukraine, and Russia's strategic defeat could threaten his regime.
Yeah.
As it faces rare examples of dissent. Both St. Petersburg and Moscow councils have suggested Putin is a traitor. Of course, that'll be dealt with, but the point is it happened at all. We've talked on the show about how some of the TV shows in Russia are getting very upset by the fact that Russia's losing. There are stories about how Putin is now trying to win over the military bloggers to try to get their support. Funnily enough, that never happened with us back with W. He never tried to get the bloggers on his side. They were all against him, just about the only ones, since everybody else had sucked up to mission accomplished. But nonetheless, that's happening. And this is an absolutely fascinating story by a known reporter, Julia Ioffe, which is in a relatively new outlet, maybe people are unfamiliar with, called Puck News.
I'm sorry?
Puck. P-U-C-K.
All right. Oh, I thought it was P-U-Q.
Puck.
Puck News. All right. Well, yeah.
You'll hear more about it because they have a lot of good people writing there.
We'll tell you the news. Okay.
So, fear and loathing in Moscow. The former queen mother of the Russian opposition, now living in exile, reflects on the terror that drove her compatriots from the capital, the contempt among those left behind, and the oligarchs are on the verge of revolt. And she just has a insider account of what it's like for the opposition in Russia, why she didn't stay. She's very frank and honest about that. She's in her 60s. She had her knee replaced, and Navalny and some of the other opposition people just told her, you really have to get out of here because I know you, and you would never survive in jail.
Yeah, or falling out a window.
Right. So she stayed when Russia invaded Ukraine and only left recently. And she talks about some of the trouble she's had in, kind of adjusting to the West, but also talks about, the fact that, look, probably what's going on there is that 70% of the oligarchs are, opposed to Putin. Maybe 30% of them still support him, but they're afraid. And, part of the problem is that Putin has co-opted a lot of the younger people, especially in places like St. Petersburg and especially Moscow, by simply making life too sweet for them to oppose him.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the Soviet Union. They're not used to hardship. They don't know what it's like to have, to have to circulate pamphlets, the Samizdat stuff, the secret behind the scenes stuff, because in the Soviet Union you couldn't publish. You had to pass these things around, to people behind their back. They have no idea about how to do that, and so they don't want to. And they're simply not ready to accept less than what they're used to. Whereas the older folks, what about the older generation? Why do they support the war? She writes, this is what's so extraordinary. I keep having these conversations with these people in regional cities and the markets, and what I find over and over again is they've relatives in Ukraine, but they don't believe their own brothers and sisters. Instead, they believe what the television tells them. I have only one explanation. They grew up under Soviet rule, and they know how important it is to conform, how important it is not to go against the regime. And if you do what the regime wants, you'll get by. You might even get a tasty morsel here and there, but if you resist, everything's bad. That's the memory that still sits in these people's cerebellums, because this KGB is back in power. Everybody understands that, and everybody's very scared.
Yeah, well, rightfully so. They're murdering people left and right. They always did.
So Julia Ioffe says, well, is this the thing that finally topples Putin? Is this Ukrainian offensive the things that brings Putin down? How would you answer this? And is it a stupid question? And she says, no, I don't think it's a stupid question at all, but I do think it's too early. If the Ukrainian army continues pushing the Russian army back this successfully and beats them, let's say, from Kherson and Melitopol, then they're well and truly effed.
Okay.
But she used the word. In deference to you and your horn that you probably didn't have ready, I didn't want to say the F word and then have you use enthusiasms by mistake.
Right.
But here's the problem. Any coup needs a mechanism. You can't just have one guy among the elites call another guy and say, hey, let's go slit Putin's throat. It doesn't work that way. When Khrushchev overthrew Beria and when Brezhnev overthrew Khrushchev, there was a mechanism, and it was the Central Committee of the Communist Party.
Right.
They could say, here's our collective decision. And not take individual responsibility, but there's no such mechanism now.
Right.
The second thing is there's no trust. Nobody in Russia trusts anybody. Hugo Chavez could walk into the barracks and say, comrades, let's go to the presidential palace, and they would follow him, but nobody trusts anybody in Russia, where public trust is in the single digits. Putin will eventually be ousted, but it'll likely be by his closest circle, some kind of junta, which won't have any authority and legitimacy. And, but it'll happen. And so Julia Ioffe says, so when do you think it'll happen?
Yeah.
When do you think we can go back to Moscow?
September 15th.
Well, probably by spring, she says, which isn't that soon. It's 9 months. Children are born in that time. But I think the situation will continue to get worse rapidly. I don't know if you noticed the small thing that happened in recent days. The deputies of the Moscow and St. Petersburg city councils each wrote an open letter to Putin demanding he resign.
Yes.
Despite all the arrests and criminal cases being open these days, they still took this step. And this mute discontent is going to continue growing in spite of it all, because grocery prices have gone up. People are afraid to spend money. Inflation. She goes on and says the oligarchs are having issues. They can't buy groceries in Europe because their digital, currency, the Bitcoin stuff has all been frozen and it's not working. And the oligarchs are very upset because they have no way to pay their mistresses.
Right.
And keep them in the lifestyle they used to. Well, by the way, their wives are upset too, but they're really upset because the mistresses are now unhappy.
Yeah. Can't keep up with their suffocation insurance.
Right. And the most important thing, she says, coups d'etat are always the handiwork of the elite. It's coups d'etat, like attorneys general. And the elite in Russia are millionaires and billionaires, people who got used to working and earning the money in Russia till Thursday, but on Friday they're cut off in London or Nice or wherever. All the kids are there in the West getting an education. The wives are there and their mistresses are there. Mm-hmm. And then there's this fact that all the crypto markets are closed, and all the oligarchs who have been sanctioned, they're weeping because they have absolutely no idea how they're going to go on with life. Before they thought, all the proles can live in Russia, but we'll live in the big civilized world, and that's over now. So the yachts have been seized, the villas in Italy. That's why I think this can't last much longer. This will be a long, hard winter.
Yes.
Very interesting article.
It is. That is interesting. It's interesting that even still they frame this in governmental terms when, to me, it's still a lot easier to understand as a mobster problem. You know, the big boss isn't letting his captains earn the way they are used to. And although they're always initially afraid to knock him off because there are loyalists who will come after him, eventually everybody starts to feel the pain and realize that it's just better for business. It's not personal, it's business. We just got to get rid of the boss and get a new one.
Right. And so the final topic that I'll take up today in the remaining minutes is, of course, Lindsey Graham and his in-kind contribution to the Democratic Party.
All right. Thank you, Lindsey
This one
Jenkins.
is from MSNBC. With proposed abortion bans, GOP eyes criminal charges for doctors. That caught my eye. GOP candidates were told to say the party doesn't want to throw doctors in jail, and yet, and that's a quote from the slide deck that they all got about how to deal with this unexpected abortion issue coming up when they had planned on everything being around inflation and gas prices.
And 50 years of work.
And yet, Republican proposals keep saying the opposite.
Well, right. We do want to throw
Senator
doctors
Lindsey
in jail.
Graham unveiled a national abortion ban yesterday, and USA Today took note of a key provision of the South Carolina Republicans' proposal. Quote, his bill also includes criminal penalties for doctors who perform abortions, including up to 5 years in prison. Not new. Republicans and state legislators have already enacted mandatory minimum sentences. And after the Dobbs decision came down and red states scrambled to curtail reproductive rights, more doctors in more states face the prospect of criminal charges. But these proposals keep proliferating anyway at the state and federal level. So, people take note. This piece here, most Americans say politicians don't know enough about abortion to make fair policies. That would include Lindsey Graham. 70% of Americans, including large majorities in both major political parties, don't believe politicians are informed enough about abortion to craft fair policies, says a new 19th News SurveyMonkey poll. The finding comes as lawmakers, particularly at the state level, are moving quickly to make new abortion policy, and people think you really shouldn't be doing that, predominantly because you don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Women shut the whole thing down. They don't know the science. They can't even figure out the science of mermaids.
Right. So here's a very serious person, that's in capital letters,
VSP.
who is a centrist, both sides kind of guy, who actually writes a newsletter called, wait for it, Very Serious.
Very serious? Okay. I thought it was going to be the Abigail Spanberger News. Okay.
Little self-introspection.
Very serious.
And in his Very Serious newsletter,
Good.
He says Lindsey Graham's abortion compromise can't win the middle. He would know he is the middle.
By definition.
So this is Josh Barrow, and he writes, Dear readers, I need to start this week with a correction.
Wrong. Yeah.
Sorry about the error. I'm not
what do you know, an error?
On a related note, Senator Lindsey Graham introduced a bill yesterday that would impose, speaking of errors, introduced a bill yesterday that would impose a national ban on abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Graham's bill does include an exception for rape and incest subject to certain reporting requirements, like you have to report within 48 hours to the police. But unlike the theoretical proposal Wall Street Journal asked about, it includes a medical exception only for later abortions necessary to save the life of the mother. Republicans tend to talk about bills that set a deadline for abortions around the end of the first trimester as being similar to laws that prevail in Western Europe, but not by offering a broader health exception. Graham's bill would impose a significantly tighter restriction. So in other words, he's lying.
All right.
His bill would also wouldn't stop states from setting their own more restrictive laws. It'd be a ceiling, not a floor, in abortion rights. Senate Republicans mostly don't seem very eager to talk about his idea. McConnell on Graham's 15-week abortion bill ban said, quote, I think most of the members of my conference prefer this would be dealt with at the state level, end quote.
Yeah, that was the promise.
So I think there's an emerging dynamic here that isn't too different from the politics of gun control. Republicans trying to pivot to more moderate positions on abortions or even echoing Democrats' language about gun control. Arizona Senate candidate Blake Master says he's for common sense restrictions on abortion. But gun control rarely works out as well for Democrats as a policy issue as the polls say it ought to, right? You could take your pile of polls about specific gun control policies with 80% support, and the politics of guns is more about gut-level trust. Who will protect my right to own a gun? Do I trust the ultimate goal of this politician isn't really to impose much more restrictive rules? And then the big difference here from the politics of gun control is that even the good polls for second trimester abortion bans don't have them at 80% support. They have most generously in the 60s, but in the case of the AP NORC poll, for example, you'd have to count the 30% of respondents who say abortion in the second trimester should be illegal in most cases. How are those respondents going to support a Graham ban? And Democrats have a large advantage over Republicans on who could be trusted. So that's why I, Josh Barrow, the middle center guy, who's very serious, continues to believe Republicans won't be able to execute an effective pivot toward a more moderate abortion stance. Basically, too long to read, because they're not moderates.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, I don't believe them because I've never believed them. But okay.
So while Graham may see himself as beating a tactical retreat, he's wrong if he thinks he's proposing something conservatives and moderates will agree on. Graham's message was already the message of amendment advocates in Kansas earlier this year. And you know what happened to them?
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind. In other words, another big fail for Graham. And Jonathan Cohen, Citizen Cohen, goes ahead and looks in the HuffPost. There are plenty of reasons to take Lindsey Graham's abortion bill seriously, which is to say there's bad stuff in it. The limits in Graham's bill are more extreme than his description suggests. Mm-hmm. He would introduce a new scientifically arbitrary timeline for abortion restrictions.
Science.
Prohibiting abortion at all stages has long been a GOP goal, and it still is.
Yes.
And, they've got to do something. And we've already gone over ad infinitum about how the GOP politicians cannot ignore their base. They can't ignore their base on this because it's basically evangelicals. So nothing's going to satisfy them, and they can't compromise. And so, one has to keep all of this in mind. So big fail for Lindsey Graham. Thank you for revving up the Democratic base even more. And, the only poll that matters is in a very short time.
Yes.
Less than 2 months.
Right. Ordinarily we say, like Donald Trump would say, 2 weeks, but, it's not. It's going to take a longer time. But, all right.
And I can't believe I got everything in that I wanted to get in.
Pretty good. That's it, because this is your last chance for the week. Next time
I know. I can only do it by not letting you talk.
Yeah, well,
but I'm from New York, so I have no trouble with
willing to do that. In fact, next time we speak, it will be Talk Like a Pirate Day. I'm aware ahead.
That's smart.
All right. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We just realized during the break, as we were signing off, or as Greg was signing off, that in Boston, Talk Like a Pirate Day is you can't tell what the hell's going on. They don't pronounce any of the R's. The whole thing is R based, and you're not going to be able to just walk around saying "yag." Avast me haddies. This doesn't really work. So I guess maybe that's why they don't celebrate it there, or maybe they do. I'd be very fascinated to hear it. And now for the first time in like 5 years, I'm aware of Talk Like a Pirate Day ahead of time. I've missed it for years. I don't intend to talk like a pirate, or like a pilot for that matter. But at any rate, I like to be aware of days so that I can say something in my posts in the morning, even though Daily Kos always crashes and never delivers them in anyway, so it doesn't matter. Okay, let's see. One other thing I wanted to point out just before we close out the subject of Lindsey Graham and other Republicans stumbling on abortion, I want to reiterate, because I don't think it got the attention it deserved. We gave it lots of time here on the show, but everybody wants to focus on Lindsey Graham blowing it, wide open and revealing the hypocrisy, among other things, along with the political, or the lack of political savvy, unless he's trying to do this on purpose for some reason, in doing this. But one of the aspects about his national ban, of course, is that that's causing them so much trouble is that Republicans were insistent that the message heading into the elections, so that people didn't get more pissed off, big backlash against Dobbs. So they are busy telling everybody, Well, like the joke went yesterday, nobody's talking about a national ban. This isn't about national ban. This is about the reason we support the Dobbs decision is because we believe, even if we think that there ought to be the right to an abortion, at least in certain circumstances, we need to leave it to the states. It's a federalism question. It's not really about the medical procedure itself. You see, we just think constitutionally it ought to be left to the states. And so introducing a national ban belies that whole thing. No, you're really just interested in doing it piecemeal, and you're looking to, like the election denialist deniers, you're looking to hide the ball until after the election, and it's too late, and you're already ensconced in power, and then you can do what you really intended to do all along, which would be, of course, a national ban on all abortions for all reasons. They're going to try and come up with the common sense approaches, as Blake Masters, I guess now is saying, well, we can have this exception or that exception because it's common sense, and then, I'll campaign on that, and then, if elected, introduce a bill that has none of those common sense exceptions and say, well, what are you going to do? I'm here for 2 years. Take it or leave it. So I wanted to bring us back to what happened in Michigan, even though we're thankful that the Supreme Court there acted to reverse the move to do this, and people will get a chance to cast their votes on the question. But remember that when the Republicans said, all right, well, Dobbs will leave this to the states, and people can vote on it as they please in the states. And then Michigan said, all right, fine, we will. Now that it's being left to the states, we'll have a vote on it. We'll get a petition together, and we'll get a ballot question approved that gives the voters of Michigan the chance to enshrine abortion rights in their constitution and put them beyond the reach of this grab by Republicans to erase that right. And, of course, the Republicans on the board of canvassers there said, well, if we vote, or if our two Republicans vote with no regard whatsoever to any of the facts on the ground with respect to whether or not the petition is valid, whether the right number of signatures were gathered, et cetera, whether it was all done properly, if we just nonetheless vote no on allowing it on the ballot, we can shut that whole thing down, as a matter of fact. And, yes, let's leave it to the states. And then Michigan says, yeah, well, not this state. In this state, the Republicans say you're not going to be allowed to vote on stuff like that, except the Supreme Court intervened and turned it around, thankfully. But there you have it. That's the story of what Republicans are doing on abortion, that they're saying nobody's interested in a national ban, and then they, accidentally introduce a national ban. We want to leave it to the states, except they're introducing a national ban. We want to leave it to the states, except we want to instruct our people in the states not to allow the states to actually have that vote. So, they're doing an awful lot to step on every rake they can find. And I'm glad, and hopefully that means that we can crush them utterly in November. But I'll take squeaking by. That will be fine. But I'll hope for a big crushing. Anyway, let's see. Other things that are in the news that I think might not have anything to do with Martha's Vineyard or anything else. There's a lot. And some of it is really kind of insane. So let's see. We heard the news yesterday, of course, that Mike Lindell had his phone seized at Hardee's. And by the way, the Hardee's Twitter feed has apparently had a great time with this. Brands love to let their Twitter communicators go crazy from time to time. And they're taking advantage of it. And let's see, I think we saw their joke yesterday was something about, now that you've actually heard of us, come try I think they were trying to make a pillow joke because Mike Lindell, and it's something about their pillowy biscuits, which only kind of barely, I appreciated the effort. It wasn't great. But then I think they tweeted this morning about using their app to order something and you get some, free something or other if you order on their app or whatever their incentive was. But they started off by saying, if you still have a cell phone, you might try our app to get the free whatever the hell it is. And that one was a much better effort. Good job there. I don't know whether I'm really going to make work for Scott trying to find the Hardee's tweets, but they're out there, and you can find them yourself if you absolutely need to. I imagine they tweet under the name of Hardee's. You might check it out. Anyway, speaking of Lindell, I had this article here at the ready, so we'll use it. Daily Beast discussing this thing, so we'll get a little bit more detail on it. All we heard was the funny part about him having his phone seized at Hardee's and him being a pillow guy. Mike Lindell, feds seized my cell phone at Hardee's. It's right there in the headline. You know, they throw those little red stamps, and we're reading from the Daily Beast, and they love to, throw a little extra comment in there, and like the red, what looks like a red ink stamp, it says, "No phone, who dis?" I like that. They took my phone, Lindell told the Daily Beast on Tuesday evening, via phone, of course. The FBI did. Kelly Well and, Zachary Petrizzo are the reporters on this piece. I guess he got another phone. My Pillow CEO Mike Lindell told the Daily Beast on Tuesday night that the FBI seized his cell phone while he was at a Hardee's restaurant. And that was just, basically like, we don't want you telling people where you're eating because it's terrible. I don't know. Hardee's is not a top-rated fast food joint. I don't want them to sue me or anything. And if they sponsored me, I'd tell you their hamburgers were delicious, I guess. Although I have not eaten at a whole lot of Hardee's. They're not regionally popular, I don't think, much around here. I do pass them from time to time. But I may have had one in my life at some point, but we must have been in dire straits. Anyway, Lindell also posted on social media a grand jury subpoena from a federal prosecutor in Colorado and what appears to be a search warrant related to a federal investigation into breached voting machines in Mesa County, Colorado. So that's interesting. I thought that the phone seizure might have been about the fake electors, but I don't know how involved in that he was. But that's what everybody else has had their phones seized for. So this is interesting. We didn't really get a picture of why he had his phone seized. Of course, he could be under subpoena by a lot of authorities in a lot of places, none of which led to the seizure of the phone. Well, only one of which led to the seizure of the phone, and the others are just superfluous. But all right, that's interesting. So a federal prosecutor in Colorado, that's good news too, because it's another area that's lighting up. Mesa County would be the place where, what's her name? Tina something. Was it Tina Peters, or do I have that wrong? I don't know. She's the clerk there in Mesa County who arranged for and participated in a break-in into her own storage facility where they are supposed to be holding the voting machines in a secure location so that weirdo cyber ninja types could come in and download all the guts of the machines, and then they started distributing the data that they had stolen at Mike Lindell's vote rigging symposia. So, all right, well, good. They're finally catching up with him on this one. The warrants request, quote, all records and information on the Lindell cell phone, that is in all caps for some reason, that constitute fruits, evidence, or instrumentalities of violations, end quote here, relating to identity theft, intentional damage to a protected computer, all right, and conspiracy to commit the previous two crimes. Okay, so 2 crimes plus a conspiracy charge. The warrant cites violations involving, there it is, Tina Peters, that's the clerk, Conan James Hayes, I don't think I know that name, Belinda Nisley, Sandra Brown, Sharona Bishop, Michael Lindell, and or Douglas Frank, among other co-conspirators known and unknown to the government. Only some of those names are familiar, though we may have read some others in passing and just forgotten about it. The the Denver FBI field office told the Daily Beast that it does not comment on individual cases, but between you and me, this guy's a real dick. That would be great, but it's not what they said. Without commenting on this specific matter, I, the spokesperson said, can confirm that the FBI was at that location, Hardee's, executing a search warrant authorized by a federal judge. I don't even know if they're talking about Hardee's. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Colorado, which issued the subpoena, declined to comment. The case appears to stem from a 2021 breach of voting machines in Mesa County, allegedly by the county's clerk, Tina Peters, and her associates. Peters is facing state felony charges in the alleged breach, alongside her former clerk's office colleagues, Belinda Nisley and Sandra Brown. Belinda, I think we've heard before. I don't know about Sandra, but she's in trouble now. Hayes, a professional surfer. Oh, yeah. I remember definitely hearing about that, but I didn't realize, I don't remember the name. But now that you say surfer. Hayes is a professional surfer. So, there you go. Oh, I see. A professional surfer turned conspiracy theorist. That's different. Now it makes sense. What? Well, he's accused of impersonating a local tech worker, to help breach the machines under Peters' direction. And what a plan that is. I need a guy who sounds like he might plausibly be an IT expert. Where should I go? Should I go over to the Geek Squad at Best Buy and try one of those guys? No. I have a better idea. Oh, what's the idea? Well, given that this is Colorado, why not, a surfer? Because one of the things when I talk to people about surfers here in Colorado, they frequently say, oh yeah, surfers are brilliant at information technology. And one thing that they do, every time surfers speak, you can practically hear the intelligence just exploding out of their brain. I mean, they're very intelligent surfers, to be sure. Professional surfers even. I imagine you have to be in order to make a living out of that somehow. It takes an intellect, no doubt. But your stereotypical surfer, who may or may not be who we're dealing with here, do they usually come out and, sound like information technology experts, or do they sound like, whoa, dude, I don't know whether they still sound like that, man. I'm so wasted. I've wasted the opportunity to rig this election. I don't know. It's an odd thing to do, to say, let's have a surfer pretend. But, then again, surfers have a California accent, and maybe you would mistake that for a Silicon Valley accent. And that is how the whole thing works out. It's smarter than you think. Well, anyway, back to the actual news here. Hayes, a professional surfer turned conspiracy theorist, is accused of impersonating a local tech worker. I don't know if it's a specific local tech worker that must be it. Now that makes sense. Identity theft. So they stole the guy's ID and said, dude, you gotta pretend to be this guy. And, we'll see. Maybe it didn't work out very well. They got caught. In November, the home of Sharona Bishop, an acquaintance of Lindell and Peters, and a former campaign manager for Representative Lauren Boebert, was believed to be the subject of a search warrant related to the Mesa County breach. So there you have it. Part of the search warrant that ended up seizing Mike Lindell's phone also was executed on the home of a former campaign manager for Lauren Boebert. Ta-da! Now, the investigation appears to include Lindell. The search warrant requests data from Lindell's phone, including any information it contains about damage to Dominion voting machines, information about Hayes' alleged impersonation of a tech worker, and the phone's internet activity, geographical location, and information on whether it could be controlled remotely via viruses, Trojan horses, and other forms of malicious software. Okay, I'm not sure what that's about. And now the quote from Lindell. They took my phone, Lindell told the Daily Beast on Tuesday evening, via phone. We suppose it was a different one. And he'd go on from there. Lindell claimed the FBI was looking for information on fellow election fraud conspiracy theorist Dennis Montgomery. Okay. Hasn't been mentioned up until now. They are looking for the terabytes from Dennis Montgomery, whatever that means. Lindell further told the Daily Beast, I hope they lift the gag order. Okay. Lindell also expounded on his legal situation in a Tuesday night video. The FBI came after me and took my phone, he said on Facebook. They surrounded me in a Hardee's. Yikes. And took my phone that I run all my business, everything with. What they've done is weaponize the FBI. It's disgusting. He never finishes his sentences either, I guess. I don't have a computer. Everything I do is off that phone. Everything was on there, and they told me not to tell anybody. Here's an order. Don't tell anybody. Okay, I won't. Well, I am. So he's not doing very well complying with this particular order. He may have had a note to remind himself to comply with the order on his phone, but then they took his phone, and now you see, he can't remind himself. So that's pretty bad. And probably not a best practice when you're running apparently multiple businesses that allegedly make them a tremendous amount of money and have it all on one phone and have no backups anywhere and no computers. It's just bad practice. Absolutely unnecessary. Pillow tycoon sidekick and Lindell TV host Brannon Howse, Howse, added when reached by the Daily Beast. Lindell also showed a copy of a subpoena dated September 7th and signed by an assistant U.S. attorney in Colorado. An official criminal investigation of a suspected felony is being conducted by an agency of the United States and a federal grand jury in the District of Colorado. A document that Lindell said was a subpoena on his nightly show said. Maybe. I don't know. I haven't read a lot of subpoenas. Do you think they say like that? That sounds formal and legalistic, like. Maybe. As a subpoena recipient, you are not under an obligation of secrecy. However, we request that you not disclose the existence of this subpoena for an indefinite period of time. That sounded a little weird. Lindell has previously been linked to multiple ongoing investigations in the state, mostly related to Peters. Shortly after allegedly breaching her own county's voting machines and leaking the data to conspiracy theorists, Peters attended Lindell's August 2021 cyber symposium on supposed voter fraud, after which she went into hiding in a series of Lindell's, quote, safe houses, none of which I guess were actually safe, it turns out. In April, following Peters' arrest, Lindell told the Daily Beast that investigators had not approached him about the breach. Well, now they have. Peters is facing state-level charges, whereas Lindell's subpoena originates from a federal grand jury, if that was, in fact, the subpoena. Lindell has repeatedly claimed to have given Peters significant gifts, including a flight to the cyber symposium on his private jet. Should have taken her to Martha's Vineyard. As well as campaign contributions up to $800,000, which, by the way, exceed Colorado's limit of $65 for gifts to public officials. So, you know, that's a bit more. And by the way, a campaign contribution for what? To Tina Peters for town clerk, $800,000. I think that's enough budget for like 15 elections for county clerk. Peters' campaign contributions are under investigation. The state's Independent Ethics Commission confirmed earlier this year, although it did not comment on whether Lindell's contributions were part of that investigation. Lindell is also tangentially linked to a similar breach of election equipment in Elbert County, Colorado, where a second clerk claims to have made unauthorized copies of voting machines with assistance from two men who have promoted election fraud conspiracy theories on Lindell's web show. And by the way, one of them is a sumo wrestler. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I'm still stuck on the surfer thing. And so we got a sumo wrestler and I can't think of anything else equally ridiculous. You know, an internationally renowned fencer is, you know, also my other fake technician. Anyway, one of the men describes his activist group, Cause of America, as being funded by Lindell. Why did you do this? Cause of America, I guess. But that's it. The Cause of America. That's some name they've got there. Okay, that's it for this stupid article about that stupid guy getting his phone taken from him at Hardee's. But now I have a little bit better picture of what's going on, except, you know, he's crazy, so it's very difficult to understand. Now, this will clear things up for everyone, I think. It's time to check in on Sidney Powell, where I learn from, where am I? AboveTheLaw.com. and I think we've been here once or twice before. This clears everything up right in the headline. Now everything becomes crystal clear. Sidney Powell warns of flock of cats in sanctions appeal. Also, mob violence. Very on brand, says the subheader. Wow. Sure, everybody. Flock of cats. Watch out. And now you know exactly what's going on. Liz Dye is the writer here for Above the Law. The Kraken is back, baby, and it is quacking. That's what it says, quacking with a question mark. So I'm reading it as a question. Not just that I don't understand why they use the word quacking here. If you see a flock of feathered animals quacking as they waddle towards a lake, you can reasonably infer that they are ducks, even if not all are clearly discernible. Sure, there might be a goose or a chicken in there somewhere, but it is certainly rational and proper to suggest that after closer examination and further inquiry, those might be ducks after all. What is not rational and proper is to focus on the one or two animals that are not clearly identifiable, ignore the rest, and conclude it's a flock of cats, and no one could possibly think otherwise. Right? I mean, that's what it says. It's a quote from where this barnyard analogy appears in an appeal to the Sixth Circuit, the actual, United States Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Really? She went ahead with this. Sixth Circuit of I gotta start the sentence over again. This barnyard analogy appears in the appeal to the Sixth Circuit of the sanctions imposed last year on attorney Sidney Powell and her merry band of Kraken lawyers in the Michigan tentacle of their election lawsuits. Got it? In August of 2021, U.S. District Judge Linda V. Parker ordered them to go to continuing legal education and pay attorney's fees to various Michigan government entities. Among other barnyard epithets, their sins included attaching facially nonsensical affidavits cribbed from other election suits without vetting them at all. The above analogy was by way of arguing that some of the affidavits were true, and so the court was wrong to sanction them for the few lying cats in the bunch. Wow. I don't even get the explanation of why that doesn't make sense. Anyway, which is hilarious and extremely on brand for Sidney Powell and Howard Kleinhendler, the two Krakenhead lawyers who put their names on this brief. Less hilarious is their invocation of Martin Luther King's 1966 speech describing riots as, quote, the language of the unheard, both because of the breathtaking audacity of the comparison and because of the implied threat of violence less than 2 years after people who believed their lies about a stolen election stormed the Capitol seeking to overthrow the government. In their telling, if the court doesn't allow them to file frivolous election challenges, then the mob will take matters into their own hands. And we wouldn't want that, would we? It calls for dramatic music again, I think. Yeah, but the volume is turned down on this one. So, okay. Anyway, the brief continues. Believe it or not, there's more to it. Appellees offer this court a naive vision of elections in a democracy, one that would suggest people in a deeply divided nation should immediately shake hands and say good game after a hard-fought election seems narrowly lost, as if they have never done that. The choice is not between appellees' vision of citizens joining hands and singing Kumbaya and election litigation they do not like. The choice is between orderly resolution of election disputes by disinterested judges and more direct, less orderly agitation for redress. Look out. Later, they warn that without First Amendment pressure valves, by which they mean lawsuits based on facially nonsensical claims of election fraud, our great experiment would fail because citizens who lack channels for peaceful expression of grievances will eventually ineluctably, right? I guess, choose non-peaceful means. Wow, I should have a riot against them just for using that word. Never mind that these lawyers and their allies filed at least 65 such election challenges in 2020, and the country still suffered an outbreak of that more direct, less orderly agitation for redress by dint of non-peaceful means. So we gave them 65 chances, and they failed in every single one of them, and they still rioted. Perhaps cognizant of the possibility that appellate judges might have read about the events of January 6th, 2021, they hedged slightly by claiming that they were simply never heard on the merits and lost on mere procedural grounds. Refuting plaintiffs' claims on the merits rather than sweeping them out of the court and sanctioning their lawyers could have assuaged such doubts, they tut-tut. They also fault Judge Parker for failing to let them file an election challenge based on unproven evidence and test it out via the crucible of an evidentiary hearing. So basically they just want to say, you have to listen to us be crazy. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got one more segment left here today. There's always Friday behind this, but gosh, there's a lot to get to. Let's see if we can run through the rest of this thing. I mean, it's so crazy, it's hard to read it quickly. But we left off, I guess, by saying that the Kraken heads fault Judge Parker for failing to let them file an election challenge based on unproven evidence and test it out via the crucible of an evidentiary hearing. They write, far from according the greater leeway that has always been applied in fast-moving election litigation with deep First Amendment and public policy implications, as though this had that, the district judge adopted a nitpicky, censorious approach, venting her revulsion at what she viewed as an unjustified assault on our political process. This is viewpoint discrimination, the most odious intrusion on First Amendment rights known to our law. It cannot stand. If we might quote our own coverage here, here are some of the things these lawyers defended as satisfying their obligation to diligently vet the evidence they presented to the court. And remember, that's really what's going on here, is that before we even read this thing, they're just saying, well, we deserve our day in court. You need to let us present our evidence. And hey, then if you contest our evidence and you say that it doesn't mean anything, well, that's one thing. But if you merely look at our evidence ahead of time and go over it and read it and come to understand what it means and decide that it's nonsensical and can't even be understood as English and so therefore is inadmissible, that's bad. You need to let us waste your time in court. You reviewed it ahead of time and figured out that it was garbage. That doesn't mean anything. We really, what we want is our ability to waste your time in court while you're wearing robes, not while you're sitting in chambers reading our papers ahead of time, as judges always do, as they're expected to do, to prepare for a trial. And, okay. So what sorts of things are they saying, yeah, we need to actually have a hearing about? Well, let's see. Copy pasting an affidavit filed in another lawsuit where a rando dog walker, we're quoting here from previous above the law coverage. Copy pasting an affidavit filed in another lawsuit where a rando dog walker says he saw an unusually cheerful couple hand some bags to the UPS guy and assumes they must be delivering fraudulent ballots is not a reasonable inquiry. failing to examine an expert statistical analysis based on facially ridiculous voter turnout figures, like 782% turnout in Muskegon, really? Well, that's not a reasonable inquiry either. Declining to verify whether your anonymous so-called expert witness has the qualifications he claims to have, and then failing to clarify with the court when the Post outs him, not a reasonable inquiry. Docketing affidavits attesting that some people requested absentee ballots and then went on to vote in person, oh my God, without bothering to ascertain whether this is actually illegal, and it isn't. Not a reasonable inquiry. That's a pretty good analysis of what was going on. And they're very upset about this. I can't believe you excluded all of this. We're appealing. The error of the judge below, Judge Parker here, is that Judge Parker looked at this evidence and said, you mean to tell me you plan to come into court and say, Your Honor, a dog walker saw somebody who looked unreasonably happy when they gave a package to a UPS guy. Therefore, voter fraud. We're not going to waste that's not happening in the court. It's just not. Do you have any evidence that did you find out what was in the package in any way, shape, or form? Is there any reason to believe that the people who were unreasonably happy looking had anything to do with rigging an election, or are they just random people like you? Well, we got to have an evidentiary hearing to find out. No, you know what? We really don't. You just haven't established a threshold that entitles you to that hearing. I mean, you're just basically going to come in here and say, Your Honor, if it please the court, there are human beings in this world and therefore guilty of voter fraud. Thank you. I mean, we're just not going to have that. As Judge Parker wrote in her scathing sanctions order, it's one thing to take on the charge of vindicating rights associated with an allegedly fraudulent election. It's another to take on the charge of deceiving a federal court and the American people into believing that rights were infringed without regard to whether any laws or any rights were in fact violated. This is what happened here. And yet, these lawyers insist they are the victims of a campaign to ensure that no attorney will ever bring an election challenge ever again. Yes, they're the martyrs. They write, Americans generally follow the people's court bromidic motto. Oh my God, I just want to punch these people, making me sick. Please, overwrite some more of your crap. If you're in a dispute with another party and you can't seem to work things out, don't take the law into your own hands. You take them to court. They're actually quoting the people's court thing here as, I don't know what. Anyway, how long will this ethos endure if lawyers are too scared to bring difficult cases for fear that a hostile judge will end their careers because they don't have a case that is not distinguishable, or the judge finds their case or some of their suggested inferences offensive? If they can't go to court, well, where will those citizens go to seek redress for their grievances? And the answer is the people's court. I mean, it's right there. Take it to Judge Judy. What's wrong with you? Oh, look, more threats of violence. Yeah, they're not unethical hacks who spammed the federal docket with procedurally defective lawsuits resting on bogus evidence they hadn't bothered to vet. They're civil rights pioneers. They go on back to their writing again, citing their cases in their look what they think their progeny to. Baker versus Carr, Miranda versus Arizona, Obergefell versus Hodges, Heller versus District of Columbia. This is some collection, by the way. Citizens United versus FEC. They have nothing to do with one another. West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett. Tinker versus Des Moines, New York Times versus Sullivan, Nixon versus United States, Gideon versus Wainwright. This is just, dogs versus cats, fire versus brimstone. Yeah, okay, sure. It goes on. There's still more. Plyler versus Doe, Bush v. Gore, and scores of cases like them would never have reached the Supreme Court under the district courts and appellees' punitive view of proper advocacy. Can't have marriage equality without false affidavits, right? Good luck with that, fellas. And with the bar complaints, too. Quack, quack. And that's the end of it from Liz Dye. Appreciate that. There's happenings all over the place in court and in the nearby environs. A lot of things happening in the legal arena. Let me see. Which ones should I share with you next? Small bore. Let's go over here and try this one. And we'll save the big stuff, I guess, for Friday. But maybe we'll make some mention of it and zoom through a few things. Because, who knows what's going to happen between now and tomorrow. This one from CNN. Jeffrey Clark. Remember him? Well, he told the D.C. bar that the DOJ's search of his home was linked to false statements, conspiracy, obstruction, investigation. This is the stilted language of a CNN headline here, but you get the idea. I'll read it again smoothly. Jeffrey Clark told D.C. bar that DOJ search of his home linked to false statements, conspiracy, obstruction, investigation by Tierney Sneed and Caitlin Polentz. I remember when Tierney Sneed used to be over at TPM, right? All right. Oh, yes. Lots of reshuffling in the journalism world lately. Not only Puck News, but I think I saw a word yesterday that everyone in creation was leaving their jobs to go to Semaphore, the new, I don't know what it is, Substack. I got no idea. It doesn't matter anymore what the platform is going to be. That's the beauty of social media is if you follow the authors, follow the journalists, it doesn't matter when they switch outlets, you still find out what they're writing about. You might not be able to read it because it might go behind a paywall, but you get to see them talk about it on Twitter anyway. But here, that's CNN, where Tierney Sneed is for the time being anyway. The Justice Department is investigating felony violations of false statements, conspiracy, and obstruction as part of its January 6th probe that led to a recent search of former Trump administration official Jeffrey Clark's home, according to an account of the criminal investigation made public Wednesday in a separate proceeding. And I'm just making sure that I'm, yes, in fact, reading current reporting on this, and I am. Good. Sometimes I miss the date on these things. Clark's legal team wrote that on June 20th, approximately a dozen armed agents, no, not armed. Oh my gosh. I thought he was I figured in support of arming, but not arming the government, just arming patriots. I see. Right. Sorry about that. Approximately a dozen armed agents of the Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General executed a criminal search warrant at Mr. Clark's home around 7 a.m. and seized his electronic devices as part of an investigation into violations of laws concerning false statements, conspiracy, and obstruction, according to a report published Wednesday, I feel like we already read this, by a committee of the D.C. Bar's Board on Professional Responsibility. This is the first time a document has named the specifics of what the Justice Department is considering as possible crimes as it looks at the top circle of political players around then-President Donald Trump before January 6th. Separate from the criminal investigation, in which Clark has not been charged yet, the D.C. Bar's Disciplinary Council brought an ethics complaint against Clark for the role he played in seeking to use his department to promote Trump's bogus election fraud claims at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. The Attorney Discipline Committee's report, released Wednesday, again, they remind us, quoted an assertion Clark made in a still confidential filing where he discloses the details of the search of his home. He had argued to the ethics authorities that his proceedings there should be on hold while the DOJ and other authorities investigate him. The Justice Department declined to comment to CNN. Clark's attorneys didn't immediately respond to CNN's request Wednesday. His lawyers said electronics were taken at the time of the June search of his Virginia home and kept by investigators over the summer. Only some of those seized devices have been returned to him. On September 1st, his lawyers wrote to the Ethics Committee earlier this month. Clark has denied the accusations that he violated attorney ethics rules, writing in a September 8th answer to the charges that he hadn't, quote, harbored any scienter to act in a dishonest fashion for self-gain or to achieve an illicit objective for former President Trump. So I guess directly addressing the written rules on this stuff. Otherwise, just overwriting like Sidney Clark and the Kraken heads. Trump toyed with the idea of firing the Justice Department's top leadership and installing Clark after Clark tried to push the department toward questioning the former president's election loss. The disclosure comes as the broader federal investigation into events surrounding the aftermath of the 2020 election has escalated. So, short, to the point, not entirely clear, but at least we have some idea of what sort of charges Clark may eventually face and how it's going with his difficulties with the ethics board of the D.C. bar. So let's see. We mentioned again John Durham's stuff, and I kind of want to revisit that at some point, but I think there's just too many other things to get to today and maybe even tomorrow. Let's see. How about this one from Politico? Let's take a look at this. This seemed kind of interesting. Who's our writer here? Ethan Herenstein and Brian Palmer. Ethan is counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law. Brian Palmer, editorial director there at the Brennan Center. And they have something interesting. Just in terms, as we're talking about weird court filings, this might follow next. Fraudulent document cited in Supreme Court bid to torch election law. Supporters of the independent state legislature theory are quoting fake history. So we hope that, perhaps the Supreme Court might be able to discern between the two. We'll see. Supporters of a legal challenge to completely upend our electoral system, and why not, are citing a fraudulent document in their brief to the Supreme Court. So I guess it's too late. They've already done it. It's an embarrassing error, and it underscores how flimsy their case really is. WTF, guys? Let's find out. This fall, the court will hear Moore versus Harper, an audacious bid by Republican legislators in North Carolina to free themselves of their own state constitution's restrictions on partisan gerrymandering and voter suppression. The suit also serves as a vehicle for would-be election subverters promoting the so-called independent state legislature theory, the notion that state legislators have virtually absolute authority over federal elections, which was used as part of an attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The North Carolina legislators' case relies, in part, on a piece of paper from 1818. Okay, that's not so unusual. But there's a problem. The document they quote in their brief is a well-known fake. I guess it's not well-known enough, though. So, as the Supreme Court considers whether to blow up our electoral system, it should know the real American history. The story starts way back. I need sound effects here. Horses, hooves clomping on cobblestones, perhaps. Maybe someone saying, hear ye, because that sounds old. It starts at the 1787 Constitutional Convention, when an ambitious young South Carolinian named Charles Pinckney submitted a plan for a new government. You probably heard about that back in history class, maybe. We don't know exactly what was in Pinckney's plan. That's interesting, because his original document has been lost to history, was wadded up and chucked in the bin. The convention records, however, I'm sorry. I thought that was going to go in a different direction. The convention records, it's the same spelling, but I thought the convention records that it sucked and they got rid of it. But no, the convention records, however, reveal that the framers hardly discussed Pinckney's plan and, at key moments, rejected his views during the debates. Those documents were sealed for decades following ratification. This created a vacuum in the historical record. Why did they do that? Into which Pinckney strode. This is rather clever. This is Trumpian, really, well before the time of Trump. In 1818, when the government was gathering records from the convention for publication, they're finally going to make it public, Pinckney submitted a document that he claimed represented his original plan. And guess what? It was uncannily similar to what had eventually become the U.S. Constitution. He was just claiming that he wrote it. Isn't that interesting? James Madison, more widely, I think, regarded as one of the main authors of the Constitution, was, quote, perplexed when he saw Pinckney's document. He was perfectly confident, quote, perfectly confident that it was, quote, not the draft originally presented to the convention by Mr. Pinckney. Some of Pinckney's text, Madison observed, was impossibly similar to the final text of the U.S. Constitution, which was painstakingly debated over the course of months. There was no way Pinckney could have anticipated those passages verbatim. And by the way, if he had, or he was proposing passages that actually made it into the final document, he would have been, I think, probably a pretty popular choice to appoint to the committee that actually drafted this thing and styled it in the end. But he wasn't, because he didn't. There was no way Pinckney could have anticipated those passages verbatim. In addition, Madison was quick to point out many provisions were diametrically opposed to Pinckney's well-known views. Most telling, the draft proposed direct election of federal representatives, whereas Pinckney himself had loudly insisted that state legislatures choose them. Madison included a detailed refutation of Pinckney's document along with the rest of his copious notes from the convention. It was the genteel 19th century equivalent of calling BS, right? Where's Greg on that?
That's bullshit.
Yes, exactly. We'll never know for certain why Pinckney concocted this fraud. Many scholars assume he was trying to sell himself to history as the true father of the Constitution. Whatever Pinckney's motivation, though, nearly every serious historian agrees that the 1818 document is a fake. John Franklin Jameson, an early president of the American Historical Association, observed back in 1903, the so-called draft has been so utterly discredited that no instructed person will use it as it stands as a basis for constitutional or historical reasoning. Since then, the document has become, in the words of a modern-day researcher, probably the most intractable constitutional con in history. Pinckney's fraud has, however, proved irresistible to the North Carolina legislators, who cited his 1818 document in their current bid for control over congressional elections. Here's why. The Elections Clause of the U.S. Constitution dictates that the times, places, and manner of congressional elections shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. We've talked about this, and what I have always said manner actually means. I wonder if he has a different definition of manner, so that's why they're using it. We'll see. Well, anyway, as it says, the U.S. Constitution dictates that the time, places, and manner of congressional elections shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, unless Congress chooses to make or alter the rules. The framers understood this authority to be subject to the ordinary checks and balances found in state constitutions. For example, the governor's veto and state judicial review. We know this in part because some framers themselves voted to approve state constitutions circumscribing the legislature's powers over congressional elections. We also know that the framers, Madison chief among them, deeply distrusted state legislatures. The North Carolina legislators, however, would have the Supreme Court believe that in assigning federal election administration to state legislatures, the framers intended to sweep aside all the traditional checks and balances, preventing state courts, preventing governors and other authorities from policing partisan gerrymandering and voter suppression by the legislature, right? And I liked the reasoning there. I just want to go over again one more time that they say, we know that that's not the case, that they didn't take the current North Carolina legislature's view of the power of supposedly independent state legislatures free from judicial review or a governor's veto, because many of the people who in fact ratified both at the convention and in the state ratifying conventions, ratified the language of the Elections Clause, were at the same time voting for state constitutions that allowed exactly those checks and balances. So why would they be saying that this state's constitution allows, contemplates, and in fact requires these checks and balances be in place, but I also approve of the federal constitution, which supposedly prohibits them? That doesn't make any sense. So they also point who are the North Carolina legislators, also point to Pinckney's fraudulent document as proof. The plan Pinckney released in 1818 assigned the administration of congressional elections to, quote, each state. That's it, I guess. Proponents of the independent state legislature theory argue that if the framers deliberately changed the chosen election administrator from the state to the legislature thereof, they must have meant to eliminate other state actors from the process. And I mean, it's an argument, except for the fact that the document is apparently a fraud. It's a forgery. So I mean, you can't really draw many conclusions. If it were real, that might mean something, but apparently not. The argument is premised on a 204-year-old lie. Whatever proposal Pinckney presented in the Constitution almost certainly did not contain this provision. As mentioned, Pinckney emphatically opposed popular elections, and after he lost that debate, derided them as the greatest blot in the Constitution. His 1818 fraud tells us absolutely nothing about what the framers believed in 1787. So that is kind of interesting too, right? He's now the big expert on how states should administer elections, but he actually was advocating that there not be any, that the state legislatures should appoint all of Congress. I wonder how much sense that makes in the, what would the state, maybe in that case, I guess the state legislature is responsible for administering elections because they're the only ones voting in them. I suppose there's that. But that's not what the Constitution ultimately spelled out anyway. Whatever proposal Pinckney presented to the convention almost certainly did not contain that provision, right? All of this. And so therefore, his 1818 fraud tells us nothing about what the framers believed in 1787, even though he was one of them. Nevertheless, the North Carolina legislators claim that they have discovered that our 200-year-old understanding of the meaning of the Constitution is wrong. You're all pretty wrong. That the framers actually intended to give state legislatures nearly unchecked power over congressional elections. They claim that the Supreme Court must throw out all our election rules and reorder our governing practice to effectuate that purpose. The interpretation of the Elections Clause, this interpretation, is both unwise and patently ahistorical. It is nevertheless surprising that the legislators' brief to the Supreme Court describes Pinckney's version of the Elections Clause as the, quote, earliest reference to the regulation of congressional elections, even though it was clearly drafted 31 years after the curtains fell on the Constitutional Convention and is the product of a well-established falsehood. Debate in the Supreme Court is increasingly littered with bad history. But if you're going to do originalism, at least use originals. Pinckney's 1818 fraud simply isn't one. Ooh, that's a killer last line. That's really, honestly, that's got to do it. But of course, nothing works logically in this world and much less in the Supreme Court. But hey, if you're going to do originalism, read the original. There's really no other alternative. Unless, of course, you just convince yourself, well, this predated it, even though it's 31 years older. That's an interesting argument. And an interesting piece of background as we proceed to this. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Why not I include this too? As I was closing out, I see I've got an email here from, well, we don't have permission to identify them, but it doesn't matter because the email is merely identified as having come from Mo S., who says this: David, if you've been around this area for as long as I have, you must remember when Hardee's bought the sainted Roy Rogers Company and promptly changed all the Roy Rogers to Hardee's. Well, I've been around for a while, but do I remember that? No, I remember Roy Rogers. I just remember thinking, what the hell happened to all the Roy Rogers? But they didn't turn into Hardee's either, because we don't have any Hardee's really around here either. There are some, but you have to go searching for them. Or maybe it's because I've ignored them all this time. Okay. Well, anyway, this was sometime in the 90s, Mo informs us, and I remember the wailing and gnashing of teeth was so vociferous and sustained that Roy Rogers ended up coming back. That's true. I did see there's still a couple around. And for a few years, all was well again. Then a few years later, McDonald's bought Roy Rogers. Oh, I don't think I even knew that. And that pretty much stuck. You can still find some Roy Rogers around. There was one in Fort Belvoir last I checked, and I think there's one in Leesburg, actually. Most of them are gone now. C'est la vie. Well, thank you, Mo, for enlightening us here. This one of the things that we love best about the show and the audience. This is something we discovered a long time ago. Greg will tell you, anytime we talk about the olden days of blogging, the reason blogging was so exciting and fun, and social media has only improved on this, is you'll run across somebody who's either a subject matter expert or just happens to remember pretty well for no other particular reason, even if they're not a subject matter expert, what happened. It's collective wisdom, and you can call on it, and it connects people in these ways, and I think it's great. It's how somebody now remembers and gives us the facts behind this. Love it. Thank you, Mo, for filling us in on that. Hardee's, the only merger I remember with Hardee's, is Hardee's affiliated in some business relationship with Carl's Jr.? Is it one of those things where, like, west of the Rockies, they're called Carl's Jr., and east of the Rockies, they're Hardee's? I don't know. They seem to go together for some reason, maybe similar ownership. But now I find McDonald's owns the thing. McDonald's apparently owns everything. It's crazy out there. Anyway, it means nothing. And there's lots more to get to. Friday, thankfully, still follows, so we can get to some of these other stories, which will include such serious things if you're, worried about, political violence in the future and the right's capacity for it. You might be astonished to read the story tomorrow from the Washington Post of missing people and buried bones at the center of an Oklahoma mystery where a white supremacist group has been discovered. They have been burying their murdered political enemies on their compound.
Radio.com.
Yikes, it's getting a little crazy out there.
You've been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
No, I'm serious. It's all about that. Plus, we have some other stuff, another ProPublica piece about Donald Trump and his use of, you'll never believe it, espionage at his own properties over the years. Anyway, that's just a teaser for you. Coming up next, of course, Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Next.